redevelopment to Greenspaces, Pearl District, and the Fields Park. My name is Jorge Abich, and I'm a landscape architect based out of Berkeley, California. During the years of 2011 to 2017, I worked for the Office of Cheryl Barton in San Francisco, California, and had the pleasure of working on the Fields Park project. As a disclaimer, I no longer work at the Office of Cheryl Barton. I am not a representative of the firm. I'm simply presenting a project I love with facts from my experience working on the project. So the Fields Park is one of my favorite projects, and it's one of my favorite places to visit. I figured as part of Infrastructure Week, I'd share this presentation on the initiatives that led to its creation, the key components of the park development, and its impact on the Pearl District. So the Fields Park is situated at the northern end of the Pearl District. And just a question, can everyone see, Rob, can you confirm, can you see my mouse moving? No mouse or yes? Okay, so I'll use this as a pointer then. So the Fields Park is located at the northern end of the Pearl District in Portland, Oregon. And the Pearl District, through its history, has had a lot of uses and changes over its time. I'm going to begin by giving you a brief history on the Pearl District, how it came to be a brownfield site, and then how that site was developed to become a revitalized urban center with a planned park system, and one of those planned parks being the Fields Park. The original natural ecology of the Pearl District, like areas in Seattle, was actually comprised of marshland and lake. Early timber harvesting was a large part of Portland's development and economy, and shortly after a lumber industry grew and the Pearl District grew around it. In 1869, the Pearl District was originally platted as Couch's Addition, and it was platted in order to handle a housing shortage that was related to the lumber industry. It was originally residential, and the lumber was distributed utilizing very minimal early railways during that time. In 1896, Union Station was built, and Union Station brought in the development of a lot of personal train travel in the area and an expansive rail service again. The Lewis and Clark Exposition then spurred even more growth in Portland's population and the expansion of the rail yards at the north end of the district. This is important and relevant because this expanded rail yard is actually the location of the future Fields Park. And between 1905 and 1918, James Hill and Edward Harriman, two local railroad tycoons, to say a name, ended up competing with their rail service and developing broader regional and national networks, building a lot more railways in the area. The lumber industry ends up declining in the around 1918, and in the years until 1950, the Pearl is transformed into an industrial commercial area, and it's primarily consisting of craftsmen and furniture builders, and this is known as the Northwest Triangle, and it's still known that way today. In between the 50s and 70s, new transportation patterns like air and highways end up impacting the railways, and a recession strike the Pearl. And the Pearl is abandoned by many industries, and as such happens, and it so happens so often, artists, marginalized and lower income populations begin adopting the Pearl, and many of them begin adopting warehouses as residences and live workspaces. In the 80s, developers began buying upland in the Pearl, seeing an opportunity to develop housing and retail for the new demographic of yups, business owners, and artists. And in 1986, Hoyt Street Properties buys 40 acres of rail yard land. This specific tidbit is important because it is the future home of the Fields Park, that property they purchased. In between the 80s and 1990s, there was a lot of redevelopment plannings that came out, a lot of initiatives that came out, and they introduced the brownfield remediation of the historic rail yards. The River District Urban Renewal Plan was adopted, and that furthered the development by providing tax breaks and incentives to developers, and that really spurred the beginning of the urban revitalization of the Pearl District. This all lends to a call for proposals for work on a Portland River District Park System Plan, which is eventually won by Peter Walker and Partners out of Berkeley, California. Just for context, Peter Walker and Partners constructed the 9/11 memorial at the World Trade Center site. 2001, that park system plan is complete and it's adopted, and it introduces 4 new conceptual parks to the Pearl District, and that ushers in the creation of these brownfield park projects. So the Portland River District Park park system plan was comprised of 4 parks, and we'll start down here on the bottom. The parks were to be connected by an urban boardwalk, and that would be connecting downtown Portland to the Riverfront Park and Centennial Mills. And the Centennial Mills was a historic mill along the Willamette River. 3 parks in the Portland District's park system plan were eventually constructed. Jameson Square, which is an active and urban park with a central water feature, is highly popular with families, kids playing in it. Tanner Springs, which is a highly successful, tranquil, and contemplative park. It is one of the most amazing parks to walk into from a city environment I've ever experienced. If you can go there, try it out. And then at the northern end, the Fields Park. And that was the recreational area with large gatherings. The bridge nor the Riverfront Park in the original plan have yet to be constructed, but there is a petition currently out in support of the development of the Riverfront Park, and I will try and find that and link that to you at the end of this presentation. As I mentioned, Fields Park was a part of the Portland River District Park System Plan, and that plan envisioned a large open space area for recreation and gathering. This directive in the park system plan was the genesis for the design of the Fields Park, a large area where people in this dense urban environment could gather, play sports, have events, and connect to the Willamette River. Early in the planning process, the Office of Cheryl Barton, along with the Portland Parks Department, initiated a community workshop series with community stakeholders to identify programmatic elements for the park. Through that series of workshops, 3 distinct programmatic elements were identified. The first, a large informal open space for recreation events and gatherings per the park system plan. The second and third elements were representative of the young urban demographic in the Pearl District, and those elements were an enclosed off-leash dog area and an enclosed children's area with playground. The series of workshops were the impetus for the park's main elements. They were eventually built. Along with these programmatic elements, a series of design considerations guided the final design and layout of the park. The brownfield site had previously been capped as part of the redevelopment, so a drainage strategy needed to be developed to drain the large lawn area and associated pathways and plantings without infiltrating water into the native soils. High winds also frequently came off of the Willamette River into the park site. In response to the drainage and wind conditions, the north end of the park was graded and pitched higher than the southern end. And that's basically on this side over here. Can you see my clicker? Sorry about that. Let's go back. Okay. Yeah, so north end being up here, southern end being down here. This allowed a successful wind mitigation strategy and drainage strategy to be developed in the park. Stormwater was then handled through a series of subdrains and under drainage systems below the lawn. These subsurface drain systems were piped and connected to a collection of rain gardens at the southern entry. Sorry about that. These rain gardens utilize phytoremediation to clean any contaminants in the ground runoff before being reintroduced into the city's storm drainage system. Connectivity to existing streets and pedestrian ways, connection to the Pearl District Boardwalk, and contextual views to Centennial Mills and the Fremont Bridge were all considered in the design of the park. The park also left open the potential addition of the overpass bridge to connect the Pearl District, which is down here, to Centennial Mills in the Riverfront Park for the original park system plan. The locations for the off-leash dog and children's play area were pretty easily determined. The north end of the park was less utilized and further from the main points of entry, so the off-leash dog area was situated at this end. And I mean, really, that's because nobody wanted to enter a park on snow food. And then the children's play area was situated off the main entry in a high visibility area, good for both security and a sense of activity in the park. The lawn is flanked by an oval-shaped walking path which connects users to secondary pathways around the park. And that walking path is actually comprised of a pervious concrete pavement that supports trucks. It's actually pretty, for the time, was a pretty incredible achievement. Now I'm pretty sure that the products have caught up, science has caught up finally, but yeah, it was a good success on that project. The park's understory is planted with broad sweeps of mass native and adaptive plantings. Native trees frames the large oval shaped walkway and flank the children's and dog play area, or the dog and children's play areas, and they'll eventually grow to provide shade throughout the park. Since its inception, Fields Park has been a valuable asset to the Pearl District, allowing for a unique set of activities to take place for residents of the area. Throughout the years, more Portlanders have taken notice, and the park has spurred its own social infrastructure. Play dates, picnics, jogs, runs, practices, sunbathing, frisbee, you name it. The park brings people outside and together, even during the coronavirus, as you can see by this gentleman here on the bottom left. But look how many people are out there right now. So that just speaks to, well, how desperate we are for outside time, and also how wonderful this space is. The park has also grown to host major events in Portland, such as the Portland Craft Beer Festival, Cider Summit, Smoked Restaurant Pop-Up Event, and Yoga in the Park. The point of all this is that an area that was once a rail yard, brownfield, serves the needs of the community and has become a place that Portlanders love and depend on. To wrap things up, I'll leave you with a short drone video provided by the Office of Cheryl Barton, showing the park in all its glory. This is a video taken a lot earlier, so the trees have grown in quite a bit. You can see the trees down here, but you'll get an understanding of the dynamics of the park through this video. Thanks for your time today, and happy Infrastructure Week. I'm going to go ahead and play this without sound because the music is kind of not that great. Thank you. Right on. So thank you for your time. Yep, we'll stop that.
Thanks, Jorge. And how long was this project, kind of from concept until completion?
Well, the original concept was produced by Peter Walker and Partners, and that was developed in 1999, and the project was actually finished in 2013. So it took quite a while to fund, develop, work with the community, get budgets in order, and ultimately execute the construction.
Mhm. Yeah, just the planning and how they're going to deal with soil amendment, removal. But fortunately, it seems like it's pretty close to the water line. Do you know how they did a lot of excavations? Was it using barges and, using the waterway there?
You know, from the images, the actual brownfield excavation occurred earlier in basically in the 90s, I believe. And so this site had already been, capped and had been remediated far before the project actually went to construction. So from what I can tell, I think a lot of it was done from ground level. There's a lot of images of trucks, and I don't believe that the areas at the riverfront have actually been remediated to the point where we are in the Pearl District. I think that the railway that is shown in the images separates kind of the Pearl from the riverfront area, and those have been handled as distinct kind of separate entities in construction. So, but however, the Tanner Springs area and the Jameson Square Park area were all kind of part of this larger park system.
Very cool to see how the drainage was done and kind of take advantage of that natural space. And of course, final remediation. I'm a big fan. I'll post a link in the comments to maybe another notable project. Well, thanks, Jorge. And before I let you go, I've asked the question, how have people been spending their shelter-in-place time and keeping their sanity? Maybe share a book or recipe or show.
Oh well, this one I've definitely been watching a lot of the Great British Baking Show. There's nothing that puts you to sleep at night, calms your mind, soothes your soul more than a bunch of British bakers baking off amazing treats that you can dream about. And as far as
Love it.
books, I read Siddhartha again recently, and that's always a great one to read.
Yes, speaking to again, you've shown me the way with the communication of Infrastructure Week is we can make significant impact by nothing more than small changes to our individual actions and behaviors. And you're definitely a proponent of that type of methodology. Annika, I believe I'm passing you the presenter. I am waiting for Chakundi with Seattle Parks and Rec to log on. You guys ready to take it away?
I think if you can add Leslie as a presenter.
So
She's
Leslie, I am unmuting you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. For whatever reason, I can't make you a panelist, which seems odd. Annika, are you able to share that PowerPoint, or is that something that Leslie has?
nope, I can do it and then I can advance the slides for us. So that'll work.
Great.
Technology
Thank
works for us.
you.
The question is where is the share button? Let's see.
Little box with the arrow going up at the bottom and the bubbles.
Okay. Some more options.
It should be on the
Oh,
left.
there we go. I think I found it.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
And let's do introductions for your team. SLR did some amazing presentations yesterday. Jeff and Annika worked with industrial wastewater. And, here we're going to talk about CETA, renewable energy, and some of the work that they are doing. So would you want to do introductions? And again, book, recipe, or show that's kept you sane?
Sure. So I'm Annika Wallendahl. I'm an environmental engineer with SLR here in our Bothell, Washington office. And the book I've been reading is In the Valley of Nobles, The Hunt for Sasquatch by John Zada. It's a really interesting book. It's more of nature writing and about the coastal BC forests than than Sasquatch per se, but it's a really good read. So I recommend that. And Leslie, did you have a favorite baking or show? Or...
Yeah. I have not. I've been very disappointed because I really haven't had time to read. I've been working a lot, but I have had time to cook. And my favorite recipe is King Ranch chicken casserole. It's a Texas. If you're not from Texas, you've probably never heard of it. King Ranch is one of the famous ranches from the old days when cattle was king here.
Interesting. Okay. And Mark, how about you?
Interesting. Mark Aragoni. I'm actually another one of those landscape architect people. So sorry about that for any of the engineers or planners on the call. I would say that I've been exploring and trying to piccata anything that's possible. So it started with chicken piccata, but it's amazing how you can stretch that recipe so you don't have to have chicken or shrimp every night. So use your imagination and have a little fun with it.
Sounds like a plan. All right, take it away.
Okay, today we're going to be talking about CETA and renewable energy. So quick overview, I'll be talking about the Clean Energy Transformation Act, give a little background here in Washington. Then Leslie's going to jump in and talk about some key renewable energy project concerns. And then Mark's going to wrap it up with solar energy project, a case study. So the Clean Energy Transformation Act was passed here in May 2019 by Governor Inslee, and it commits Washington State to have an electricity supply that's free of greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. So there's 60 electric utilities that must comply with CETA, and stakeholders is pretty much the entire mixed bag of everyone you can imagine: business customers, communities, consumers, renewable energy developers. And CETA integrates or builds upon Washington State's existing clean energy law, so the Energy Independence Act, which is also known as I-937. So that started off with 3% renewable energy targets for 2012 and 15% renewable energy targets in 2020. And so the CETA renewable energy resources are similar to the EIA renewable resources, so water, wind, solar, geothermal, landfill gas, wave, energy tidal, gas from sewage treatment plants, biodiesel fuel, and biomass energy. So there's a lot of milestones. This is an abbreviated collection, but 2019, so that was last year, CETA was passed. In 2021, there's going to be reporting requirements established for the utilities. 2022, every utility has to publish their own clean energy implementation plan. When we get to 2030, 100% of the electricity for retail customers has to be greenhouse gas neutral. And at this time, offsets are still allowed. And then by 2045, 100% non-emitting and renewable energy, and no more offsets are allowed. So non-emitting energy resources, that would include nuclear, hydroelectric. There's some special considerations for what can be classified as hydroelectric under CETA. I won't go into all those details, but currently our largest nuclear energy facility here in Washington State is the Columbia Generating Station, and then our largest hydro is Grand Coulee Dam. And then, oh, I wanted to mention there's a great interactive map at the Northwest Council. I'll just www.nwcouncil.org. So you can look at different projects and when they were implemented across the Pacific Northwest. So CETA defines renewable energy as water, wind, solar, geothermal, renewable natural gas, renewable hydrogen, wave, ocean or tidal power, biodiesel fuel, and biomass energy, with some stipulations on what those fuel sources and where they come from need to be. So what's new in Washington with renewable energy? So this is a map of what projects were initiated between 2010 and 2020 here in the state. So we've got biomass, we've got some energy storage projects, we've got some wind projects, and then natural gas projects. So that's a snapshot of what the most recent projects have been. And then I will pass it on to Leslie now.
Thanks so much, Annika. the implementation of CETA is going to dramatically accelerate, we hope, the development of renewable energy projects in the area. Most likely, wind and solar are going to be particularly popular because they are very scalable and they are near zero emission. However, near zero emission is not totally zero emission, and it also doesn't mean zero impact. While these are great projects, these are still industrial facilities that do impact the area, and they do require pre-approvals and permits, and they do require environmental compliance activities. So, what is the best way to avoid project pitfalls when you're developing a renewable energy project? What I tell my clients is just think about being a good neighbor. So what is being a good neighbor? Being a good neighbor is when you're designing your facility, you take into consideration what kind of area you're going into. Is it urban? Is it suburban? Is it rural? What fits with this neighborhood and this community? If you follow that, you are probably going to be a good neighbor. Next slide, please. So what are some of these good neighbor considerations to take when you're siting your project? One of the big ones, more so with wind than with solar, is the issue of noise. You have issues with the timing of noise. Noise is particularly unpopular at night. The type of noise, whether it is in the low register or high register, and your overall proximity to others. Another issue is overall aesthetics. You can get into this with both wind projects and solar projects. It has to do with the overall size and appearance of the site and how it contrasts with the surroundings and the neighborhood. Another issue that people often forget about is the impact on surrounding structures, vehicles, and population density. You have the potential to interfere with the neighborhood's current traffic, parking, and access to other buildings. If you take into account these issues when you're doing your design and when you're doing your siting, you can add in buffers, screens, and other remedial actions to make it a more attractive project to the neighborhood. Next, please. In addition to the siting issues, a lot of people don't realize there are quite a few environmental permits and environmental regulations that do apply to wind and solar sites as well as other renewable sites. One of the most important of which is the terms of your real estate lease. That is a legal document, and often it includes restrictions that developers forget about when they develop their project, and they end up not being able to do what they really want to do. Negotiating a good lease is very important. Next up is your land use and zoning permit. This is what your project lives by and dies by. This is the permit that allows it to exist. It doesn't necessarily make you do anything differently. It allows you to build and operate the site. And this is something that you negotiate with your community. This isn't a state level permit or a federal level permit. This is something you are working with your neighbors to obtain. Other issues are stormwater pollution prevention plans or permits. Of the traditional environmental media, stormwater is probably the most prevalent at a solar or wind site because you have so much real estate that the facility covers, and most of it is open. Providing for good drainage and preventing erosion is very important. You also have to comply with noise ordinances, which I mentioned before. And this is always a big surprise to people. You need air permits. Most people think of wind and solar as zero emission, and it is zero emission power generation. But in order to generate that power, you need engines, boilers, and heaters that often are run by diesel generators, particularly if you're in a rural or a suburban area and you're not able to connect to the grid. You also, at a big facility, may into a chemical inventory reporting or a spill prevention control plan. And you will probably have at least a little bit of hazardous and solid waste management to deal with. So these are things you take into account when you develop and run your project. And if you follow the rules and get your permit in place, most likely you will be a good neighbor and have a good reputation with the community. Mark, I've been talking in general terms. He's going to go through the specifics of developing a project.
Thanks, Leslie. So what we figured we would do is sort of build the presentation from a sort of a global look at regulation and requirements that we're all seeing throughout the country. Look at a little bit of pitfalls, things to avoid, and then actually take you through an actual project. Now I'm located on the East Coast, in the little state of Connecticut, and we cover and have been experiencing quite a bit of solar projects, anywhere from the 2 megawatt to the 20 megawatt size, and those, generally speaking, run anywhere from a 15 to 20 acre site upwards to 100 to 150 acre sites in order to get that type of megawatt output on a site. The one we picked to show you today is in Ludlow, Massachusetts. Ludlow, Massachusetts has a population of about 20,000 people. It has a downtown. I would consider it not rural. It's more of an urban rural landscape. But one of the biggest things that I think solar developments, no matter where you are going to encounter are, when we think about 10 years ago, what we thought of a solar project would be, a ground mounted solar project, it would most likely bring a picture in your mind of a desert or an arid region with a whole lot of solar panels on it, primarily with flat topography. What we don't have a lot of being left over in coastal communities and in mountainous regions is flat land. So how solar projects are being looked at right now through the permitting process is they are site development projects, and they're being held to all the requirements, regulatory permits that a site development project would be required, whether it's a subdivision or a commercial development. That's really how we have to look at ground-mounted solar projects now. So just some details on this project. It's an 18-acre site, of which our solar envelope was about 7 acres. This site was partially wooded. It was mostly overgrowth, scrub brush. It did have some trees that needed to be cleared. And it required the full gamut of regulatory permits, from planning to Conservation Commission to Department of Environmental Protection review. Next slide, please. So as you can imagine, it was a full set of plans that was developed. As a landscape architect, I was part of a team of civil engineers, geotechnical engineers, wetland scientists, you name it, went into putting together about a 15 to 20 page set of plans that went through the regulatory process. What you're looking at is a topography plan that in order to get and achieve the maximum efficiency of a panel layout, we did manipulate contours. We produced the grading plan. And as you can imagine, and as we'll show you in a few photos, that the entire landscape has changed, and therefore stormwater control, stormwater runoff, erosion and sedimentation controls become a very big part of a solar ground mounted project. Next slide. So as you can see how a project is presented graphically, you saw the black and white engineering drawings, but there's a lot of other ways. A lot of these come into effect when you consider being a good neighbor. Well, this particular project, as you can see, was an 18-acre project located along an electrical transmission line, which is key for a solar project to get that power back out onto the grid. But it was also bordered on two sides in a suburban neighborhood. So if you can imagine living in one of those houses, your concern really isn't noise. It's what is my view shed going to look like, and what are the environmental impacts going to be? So it's a matter of meeting with neighbors, having neighborhood meetings, developing three-dimensional graphics so you can explain what the post conditions would look like, whether they're photo simulations or whether they're illustrative sections that's depicted here. It really gives people a comfort level of how far away, what it's going to look like, how tall the panels are going to sit above the ground. And then you can actually look and deal with homeowners on a one-to-one basis on, are we going to install landscape berm? What are the type of plant materials that are going to be placed on this berm? And it becomes more of the neighbors, the stakeholders understand what's going to happen before it happens. And that can oftentimes be more important than the actual regulatory permitting process that happens. So the next slide. And just to show you some actual photos of this project's development, this project was completed in 2018. It's fully up and running right now. It's producing about 2.5 megawatts DC onto the grid. This was a public utility who constructed this project and was the project proponent. But as you can see, just a few things, the clearing and grubbing activities, changing that cover type. We do have topography on this one. This one actually had slopes of up to 15%. So you can see that the cover type was changed, which makes swales, water diversion berms, S&E controls, and ongoing observation and making sure that after significant rainfall events, that everything is still working throughout the construction activities. And then as you can see in the lower left and the lower right-hand photos, there are permanent stormwater quality measures that are installed with all of these projects. Pre-condition stormwater runoff needs to match post-condition or improve a post-condition runoff condition. And these are fully engineered systems. We've done a pretty good job at eliminating the amount of concrete. Underground systems are frowned upon, so we're doing it with above ground swales, berms, bioretention areas, limiting the amount of pipes, and we've had some pretty good success. The next phase of solar projects really is going to have to deal with, and we already see it in the northeastern United States, and I'm sure it's happening everywhere, is the cover vegetation type on some of these large facilities. So we've been involved in a few projects that are really focusing on pollinators, wildflowers, trying to have more of an environmental positive net, just besides the fact that they're promoting this wonderful renewable energy source, but they can do so much more by advancing some of the things, like what is that cover type? If it's lawn, it has to be mowed, a couple times a month. That costs the operator time and effort. Also, lawnmowers throw stones and they break panels, believe it or not. So the thought of making these sites actually more environmentally sensitive, on top of being a renewable energy resource, we're still going to see more changes come for the better, I believe. Well, thank you.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, the theme of almost all of the projects we've highlighted in Infrastructure Week is you have your purposeful benefit, whether it's generating electricity or cleaning water, in terms of green infrastructure, things like that. Almost all of these have ancillary benefits, whether it's, now you have additional habitat or restoration of native pollinators, which is a huge issue that I don't think many people think about. But through, invasive plant species, among other things, the thing that just hit the news here in Washington and has quickly spread across the nation now are the Asian hornet, the murder hornets. Thinking about, these issues that we've brought in, now we can sell photovoltaic is actually good for the habitat and restorative. So that's pretty cool. And who have you worked with on, plant species identification? Is that a nonprofit?
Oh, that's actually very interesting. We, in a project in Connecticut, the one we just looked at was in Massachusetts, but a project in Connecticut, we actually brought in our accredited university, University of Connecticut, and brought in their landscape architecture program. Worked with one of their professors to make it one of those real life studio environments. So that's worked out really well. And we had a private solar developer who actually approached it with a positive attitude. And that one will have a pollinator impact to it. So we teamed up with the local university on that one.
It's good to see that, both of the sites that I've worked at, more so from corrosion mitigation, they were out in the Central Valley of California, and we actually had a lot of challenges with the soil due to the expansion and cracking, stability of the pylons. But I found it interesting that it was completely bare. There was no cover. And in an area like the Central Valley, where something like 90% of our citrus comes from, you'd think they'd benefit from some sort of native vegetation. Is there any added maintenance that you know of when it comes to having that ground cover?
Yeah, I mean, it's a trade-off and it's going to take a little bit of time. I'm happy that we're even discussing it now and people are not saying, oh, what are you talking about? It's that trade-off between understanding the cost benefit of having to maintain, a fescue or something that needs to be maintained versus the increased cost of most likely on the installation part of getting a native wildflower mix. So the upfront cost has to balance off with the savings on the maintenance end of it. So, pollinator, you only have to knock that or cut that once a year, twice a year to keep the woody debris out of it, because you obviously can't shade solar facilities. That's a no-no. But it's getting all these, whether it's a public utility who's building the solar facility or a private solar company, getting them to understand, well, there are benefits to this. It may cost a little bit more, but in the long range, it's going to play out to be in your benefit. Plus, there's that ethical part of being a good neighbor and being a good steward of the land, that if we can bring that, as a private consultant, it's something that we should do.
Exactly. And not to mention, in terms of quantification, and this being an anecdotal statement here, ground cover absorbing heat, and we know heat buildup in PV is a reduction in efficiency, correct? So has there been any, quantification of additional production?
I'm sure there has been, but that's out of my realm of knowledge.
Anecdotal. I love it. And I noticed you said it's DC transmission, and from what I understand, one of the biggest issues in large PV generating facilities, it's that conversion, those inverters that tend to go boom, and inevitably all seem to go boom. It's just at what rate. So does this send DC to grid?
So the inverter technology, just like panel technology, is changing. It's almost daily. The efficiency of panels, what you needed to have for property size, we'll say 20 acres to get a 5 megawatt output, now probably can be done on 10 acres. And that's just the efficiency of the panels. 3 years ago, we used to have concrete pads and these inverter pads, every so many rows of solar panel layouts. Now the technology is you can do inverters, mounted 2-year racking system on each row, so you don't have to have these large inverters. So the technology is changing so much, it's decreasing the footprint, increasing the amount of output. But that changing from DC to AC is something that has to happen. As we know, the DC power users are just not as common as our common household. Everything runs on that AC current. I don't see that going away, but we'll see if the technology changes. It's amazing to see the size in these developments, these solar developments, shrinking just because of the increased efficiency of panels.
And I believe, there was one building, the name escapes me, but it's a novel project that is a DC grid building. So instead of having thousands of tiny little transformers to charge our phones and computers, we leverage the fact that we have now a building that runs off DC, because nearly every device, if not every device that we have, runs off DC or is fully capable of running off 12-volt DC. So interesting to follow, you know, and then that kind of removes that inefficiency, which is transform to DC, back to DC, reduces the amount of products that we have as well. So, awesome. Is there any other questions? I urge people, if they have one, you could use that raise hand feature. You know, and while I wait to see if there's any, I'll ask one other question. You know, you mentioned the community engagement. There's concerns with infinite concerns when it comes to PV. It's non-traditional, right? And the same goes for wind energy. It's ugly, or it's going to destroy the landscape. But we know what happens with traditional generation, with coal and fossil fuel. So how was that communicated? You know, how did that process take place? Either Jorge, Mark, or Annika?
Are you talking about the project that Mark recently discussed, or?
Yeah, just in general, if anybody's had experience in like that actual community engagement part of, you know, bringing this project to life.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on several CETA projects, and community engagement early on is super important. I know that Mark's team has some folks that are National Charrette Institute certified, which can be really important to get people together and kind of work towards consensus on some of these projects that have such a wide range of stakeholders. And I think Leslie mentioned it as well, like it can be harder to bring the community on board than get the actual environmental permits in some situations. So
well, I don't see anything else popping up, and unfortunately Chakundi with Parks and Rec is unable to join, so I am gonna at least share some of their work, because just over our call, it was crazy the statistics he was dropping on me, just the number of parks, the amount of work they have to maintain. So bear with me here. This is from their 2018 impact. Just kind of go through some of these. The city of Seattle has 12 pools as part of Parks and Recreation. I did not know that. I'll go through their list of parks, but over almost 1,700 acres of urban forest restored in 2018. That's amazing. And having this single fact right here, I don't know, you might be able to see my cursor, but 94% of residents living within 10-minute walk to a park. Sierra, my partner, and I yesterday went for a walk up 17th, and again, within 10 minutes, we were right by a park. Now, the real question here is, what about that 6%? And how do we fill that in, right? How do we make it so everybody in all cities has access to green spaces? We know the psychological benefits, the physical benefits of being outdoors and in a park setting. Like I said, once a week, I take my bike to Gasworks, probably 3 to 4 times a week. I take my bike to another park, whether it's Golden Gardens, Olympic Sculpture. It's a really good outlet for that stress and all that stuff that builds up staring at a computer screen. I'm trying to see if there are, I'd really like to see the park numbers on here, but I guess they don't have it. 46 formerly homeless adults secured employment after completing the Seattle Conservation Corps program. Very cool. Again, opportunities within infrastructure, opportunities to better our cities. Seattle Parks and Rec also has a youth internship program, which is very important. They have a massive maintenance program as well. So we're just going to go through this quickly. This is their current projects. I believe their employee count was well over 1,000. All right, starting in alphabetical order here. Let's just scroll through here. This is crazy. Hundreds of parks in Seattle. I'm sure, and most people on this call, if you're in Seattle, like I said, you're probably in that 10 or that 94%, 10 minutes from a park. I'd be curious. What everybody on the call? What's well, I guess Annika, you're the only one in Seattle, huh?
I mean, I might be. I think some people who are probably participating are in Seattle as well.
You have a favorite park in Seattle?
Yeah, I like the Arboretum a lot. I'm not sure if that falls under the Washington UW's park system or not.
Washington Park, that might be it. Friends of the Arboretum. I believe, yeah, that Arboretum is part of Seattle Parks and Rec.
Mm-hmm.
So
And then
crazy
like
number.
Seward Park is pretty amazing too. So
Yeah, it is quite amazing. Well, I'm sorry that we couldn't have Chakundi here. Like I said, he does a lot of amazing work. I'm sure he's had his hands full keeping things clean and open. At least parking lots closed, spaces open. Bring this back. What happened to my WebEx? So with that, it's kind of a bit a shorter event, but there's a lot of very cool topics discussed. Again, we highlighted the opportunities in infrastructure, the tangential benefits of green infrastructure and remediation, using renewable technologies to also capture some of these other ways to improve our habitat and overall global health of the environment. So with that, I want to remind everybody with Infrastructure Week, we want to highlight the importance of community awareness and civic engagement. Two things that were just with Mark's presentation highlighted as being very important to get some of these projects pushed through. And without this community awareness and civic engagement from the larger population, it's just a few strongly opinionated stakeholders making the decisions for all of us. And I love saying that because, most people on Infrastructure Week that are doing presentations, we're all very passionate about our work. We have our opinions, but it's important to capture everybody's opinion in some of these large projects. Because like I said, we need to think about the legacy of our infrastructure and the effects that will be felt by future generations, decades, if not centuries down the road. So the best ideas have rarely become reality without adequate support, and some of the worst ideas have been pushed through because of limited awareness and tamed engagement. Tomorrow we will be concluding Infrastructure Week with a very awesome set of presentations dealing with equitable infrastructure and development and environmental justice. We'll be joined by our friends at Front and Centered, the Duwamish Tribe, Olympians for People-Oriented Places, and the Army Corps of Engineers is going to be talking about their work at the Chittenham Locks. It's going to be a very cool event. We're going to learn a lot of important things, policy and initiatives that are going on to, again, make our communities more equitable and ensure that any new construction, any new infrastructure, public development takes into account the lessons of history and proceeds on a sustainable path forward. I thank everybody on the call. I appreciate your time, as does our community. Appreciate your work. I bid adieu, and we will see you tomorrow. And a quick reminder, again, we'll be posting a recording of this, and all these topics will be listed on our blog, shared to all registrants on Eventbrite. So thank you, everybody, and almost Friday.
Thank you.
thank you.